Ancient sailors crossed immense oceans without any of the tools we consider essential. They were navigating a world far more connected than our history books often admit. This is the story of the forgotten trade networks that quietly linked early civilizations across oceans. By the end, you will permanently change how you see the ancient world, transforming it from a collection of isolated cultures into a single, intricately woven tapestry of human ambition. How did Polynesian voyagers possibly reach South America, and why do Roman coins keep turning up in Indian soil? These silent threads of exchange challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. What does it mean for our story that we have always been more connected than we realized? Our modern maps betray us, with their thick lines and bold colors dividing continents. To the ancients who lived by its rhythms, the ocean was not a wall but a road, one of the most powerful and reliable ever created. This is the concept of maritime connectivity. It means seeing the sea not as empty space separating cultures, but as a fluid, living network that actively connected them. The key was not advanced technology, but profound knowledge. Early mariners became masters of their environment. They learned to read the consistent patterns of prevailing winds, like the trade winds that blow steadily across vast stretches of ocean, as predictable as a seasonal highway. They understood the great ocean currents, massive rivers within the sea that could carry a vessel for thousands of miles with minimal effort. And they navigated by a celestial map, using the sun, moon, and the precise rising expanse of the open Pacific. Their vessel of choice was the outrigger canoe, a masterpiece of balance and ingenuity that could carry families, their precious plants, and animals across thousands of miles of open ocean. Wherever they landed, they left behind a clear signature, fragments of pottery decorated with intricate geometric patterns pressed into the clay before firing. This pottery is their cultural fingerprint, found scattered like breadcrumbs across the islands from the Bismarck archipelago all the way to Samoa, a maritime highway of fired clay spanning over 2,000 miles. This was not a single frantic exodus, but a sustained, deliberate expansion over centuries. They moved from island to island in a carefully orchestrated leapfrogging pattern, always maintaining connections back to their points of origin. What fueled this network was not just the need for new land, but a vibrant exchange of goods that bound these far-flung communities together. They traded obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for making sharp tools, sourced from specific islands and distributed across the network. They exchanged shell valuables, ornaments that carried social and ceremonial meaning. Most importantly, they transported a portable ecosystem. In their canoes were the cuttings of domesticated plants like taro, yam, and breadfruit, and animals like chickens and pigs. They were not just exploring new islands, they were quite literally planting their culture, ensuring their way of life could take root wherever they went. This created something profound, a shared identity across an immense aquatic world. A person living on a remote island in Vanuatu would use tools, eat food, and decorate pottery in almost identical ways to a relative living a month's sail away in Fiji. It was a civilization defined not by walls or monuments, but by ocean currents and kinship ties. Their success laid the entire technological and cultural groundwork for the later Polynesian explorers, who would go on to reach the farthest corners of the Pacific, from Hawaii to Aotearoa, New Zealand. The story proves that oceanic travel at this scale was intentional, repeatable, and sustained over generations. It shows us that the first threads of a global tapestry were being woven not on continents, but across the blue highways of the sea. While they were mastering the Pacific, another ancient body of water, far to the west, was humming with an even denser and more diverse exchange. While they were navigating by stars in the Pacific, another ancient wind was conducting a symphony of exchange half a world away. The Indian Ocean operated on a different, more predictable rhythm, the pulse of the monsoon. For 6 months of the year, winds blow steadily from the southwest, pushing ships from Africa toward India. Then, as if on a celestial schedule, they reverse, blowing from the northeast for the other half of the year, carrying those same ships home. This was not a barrier, but a seasonal clockwork that ancient mariners learned to read and ride. They harnessed this rhythm to create the world's first truly transoceanic marketplace, a decentralized web of trade that connected continents before the Silk Road was a concept. This vast network was built not by a single empire, but by a chorus of civilizations playing their part. From the islands of Bahrain arose the civilization, a legendary mentioned in Mesopotamian texts, acting as a middleman for goods flowing between Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley. From the subcontinent, the sophisticated, with their planned cities and standardized weights, were likely sending finely drilled carnelian beads and cotton textiles to distant ports. And sailing from the islands of Southeast Asia, early Austronesian traders brought spices and precious woods westward on the monsoon winds. The inventory of this ancient bazaar reads like a list of desires: frankincense and myrrh from Arabia, ivory and exotic animals from East Africa, black pepper and gemstones from India, cinnamon possibly from Sri or even farther east. This was commerce on a grand, intimate scale. The evidence is etched into the landscape itself. In modern-day Gujarat, India, archaeologists uncovered a sophisticated, brick-lined dockyard dating back over 4,000 years, complete with a spillway to manage tidal water levels. A facility designed for the constant arrival and departure of cargo ships, but the connections went far deeper than pottery and beads. They traveled in the very soil. Have found evidence of African crops, like sorghum and pearl millet, appearing in Indian archaeological layers from this early period. This suggests a profound two-way flow, not just of luxury goods, but of biological specimens, seeds carried by traders that would go on to reshape agriculture and diets. This network was a quiet engine of understanding, where merchants from different worlds met in neutral ports, exchanged goods and stories, and created a shared, hybrid culture of the sea lanes. It was a system built on mutual benefit and seasonal trust, proving that connection could thrive without conquest. And within this bustling monsoon marketplace, one category of artifact stands out as particularly mysterious, a silent witness to journeys so vast they defy simple explanation. Buried in the sands of a coastal site in Chile, archaeologists uncovered a handful of bones that would rattle the foundations of New World history. At a place called researchers found the remains of chickens. That in itself is not unusual. What stopped them cold was the radiocarbon date. These bones were from a period well before Christopher Columbus ever set sail, long before any Spanish or Portuguese ship could have brought poultry to the Americas. The immediate implication was as simple as it was revolutionary. Someone had brought chickens across the Pacific Ocean long before recorded history says it was possible. This tiny, fragile evidence pointed to a monumental journey. The leading suspect in this mystery has always been the Polynesians, the heirs to the tradition, whose oceanic exploration we have already seen. The logic is compelling. We know they carried chickens in their voyaging canoes as a vital food source. We know their navigation skills were capable of reaching the most remote islands on Earth. Could a storm-blown voyage, or perhaps a deliberate expedition, have carried them the final, vast distance to the coast of South America? The chicken bones et al. Became a silent witness, testifying to a connection that official history had erased. But like any good mystery, the case is not so simple. The dating of archaeological materials, especially from coastal sites, can be tricky. Some researchers questioned whether the bones could have been contaminated, giving a falsely early date. The debate grew heated, a classic clash between a bold claim and the rigorous demand for irrefutable proof. Science, however, had another tool. Researchers turned to genetics, examining the DNA of ancient chicken remains from across the Pacific. Their search was for a specific genetic signature, a marker that could link lineages. While the full picture remains complex, some studies have suggested a prehistoric introduction of chickens from Polynesia into the Americas, a biological clue written in the bird's very code. Yet the chicken does not stand alone in the witness box. Its testimony is powerfully corroborated by a plant, the sweet potato. Known as in Polynesian languages, this starchy, nutritious root crop is undeniably native to South America. Yet it was found thriving across the Pacific Islands, from Hawaii to New Zealand, when European explorers first arrived. The Polynesians had a word for it. They integrated it into their agriculture and mythology. For the sweet potato to be in Polynesia, someone had to have transported it across thousands of miles of ocean. The transfer had to be a two-way street. This is the profound insight from this case. These forgotten networks were not just moving shells and stones, they were conduits for life itself. A single successful voyage could transfer an entire species, a package of genetic potential that would silently alter landscapes, diets, and the very future of the societies that received it. The chicken and the sweet potato represent a form of biological exchange that predates the famous Columbian exchange by centuries, perhaps even. They force us to look at the ancient world and wonder, what else crossed the seas without a written record? What other plants took root in foreign soil? What other animals found new homes because of these quiet, persistent threads of connection across the blue? If life itself could travel these routes, then perhaps the most profound exchanges were not of goods, but of ideas carried not in ships' holds, but in the minds of the travelers who made the journey. The story of these connections is literally written into the earth. When one sifts through ancient soil, they are not just looking for seeds, they are reading a silent history of human movement. The most compelling evidence for these forgotten voyages often comes not from stone or metal, but from the plant world. Two humble travelers, the sweet potato and the bottle gourd, hold clues that challenge our maps of the ancient world. Take the sweet potato. This nutritious root crop is undeniably native to the Americas, evolving in the Andes Mountains of South America. Yet, when European explorers first reached the islands of Polynesia, from Hawaii to New Zealand, they found the sweet potato already thriving as a staple crop. The Polynesians had their own word for it, and it was woven into their stories and agricultural cycles. For it to be there, a living piece of South America had to have crossed over 2,000 miles of open Pacific Ocean. The most logical explanation is that Polynesian voyagers, during one of their incredible expeditions, reached the South American coast. There, they encountered this new food source, recognized its value for long sea voyages and island cultivation, and brought cuttings back with them across the sea. This was not an accidental drift, it was a deliberate transfer of biological technology. A successful sweet potato cutting meant greater food security for an entire community, a treasure far more valuable than gold. Then there is the quieter, more ancient mystery of the bottle gourd. This plant, with its hard-shelled fruit perfect for use as a container, appears in some of the earliest archaeological sites in the Americas, dating back over 10,000 years. The puzzle is its origin. Genetic studies suggest the bottle gourd likely originated in Africa. So how did it get to the Americas so early? One theory is natural dispersal, that dried gourds could float across the Atlantic Ocean on currents, surviving the journey to wash up on American shores, where humans then collected and cultivated them. Another, more intriguing possibility is that they were carried intentionally by very early seafarers. Either way, their presence tells a story of transoceanic movement, whether by the hand of nature or the hand of humanity, long before any written record. These plants are more than just curiosities. They are reliable witnesses. Unlike a pot or a coin that could be traded and retraded over centuries, a plant needed careful, deliberate transportation. It required someone to nurture a cutting or carry seeds across a vast ocean and then successfully cultivate it in a new land. This makes botanical evidence a powerful testament to direct contact. It reveals the practical, survival-oriented layer of these networks. Voyagers were not just exchanging ornaments, they were exchanging the very foundations of life, packages of genetic potential that could quietly alter the destiny of an island or a continent. But if seeds and cuttings could cross these oceanic highways, what else was being carried in the minds of the travelers who brought them? The exchange of flora sets the stage for a far more subtle and profound kind of transfer, the movement of ideas, stories, and perhaps even the blueprints for civilization itself. But what if the most valuable cargo was not in the hull, but in the mind? The movement of plants and animals reveals a network of physical contact, yet the most profound connections may have been intangible. Archaeologists and historians grapple with a fascinating puzzle when they see strikingly similar ideas appear in civilizations separated by vast oceans. Were these parallel inventions, born from human minds solving similar problems, or whispers of a shared story carried across the waves? This debate between independent invention and cultural diffusion sits at the heart of understanding our interconnected past. Consider the pyramid. The stepped pyramid structure is iconic in both ancient, at places like, and in Southeast Asia, at sites like Cambodia's Angkor Wat. Both served as sacred mountains, linking Earth to the heavens. It is entirely possible that two cultures, independently inspired by the form of a mountain, arrived at a similar architectural solution to express a universal spiritual concept. The same logic applies to technology. The backstrap loom, a simple yet brilliant device for weaving textiles, appears in ancient South America and across Oceania. It solves a common human need for creating cloth, and its invention could easily have occurred multiple times. These cases highlight a crucial principle: human ingenuity often finds similar answers to universal challenges. Yet some parallels feel less like coincidence and more like a shared script. Look at mythology. Cultures separated by entire oceans tell remarkably similar stories of great floods that cleanse the world, of heroic figures who voyage to the underworld and return, or of divine beings who bring the gifts of agriculture and fire to humanity. The details vary, but the core narrative bones are strikingly familiar. Could these stories have simply arisen from shared human experiences of cataclysm, journey, and discovery? Absolutely. But another possibility is deeply compelling. What if these myths were not independently born, but were carried? A trader from across the sea does not just bring spices or shells. He brings tales of his homeland, stories of gods and heroes that captivate his hosts. Over generations, these stories could weave themselves into the local folklore, adapting to new landscapes but retaining their original essence. This transfer of intangible culture is the silent, deepest layer of exchange. It suggests that these maritime networks were conduits for worldviews, shaping how people understood their place in the cosmos. The journey of an idea is far harder to trace than a piece of pottery, but its impact can reshape a civilization. And sometimes, the evidence for this incredible journey is not a story or a style, but a single, solid object that ended up in a place it simply should not be. A Roman coin rests in the red soil of southern India. It bears the profile of Emperor Tiberius, struck in silver or gold over 2,000 years ago and thousands of miles from Rome. This is not a single, curious anomaly. Hoards of Roman coins, particularly from the reigns of Augustus and Tiberius, have been unearthed across southern India, and even as far as in what is now Vietnam. These metallic travelers are some of the most tangible, clinking evidence of the ancient world's deep connections. They point us directly to a historical document that reads like a merchant's guidebook, the Of the Sea. Written by an anonymous Greek-Egyptian trader around the 1st century of the Common Era, it details the ports, commodities, and sailing routes of the Indian Ocean. It describes a bustling commerce where Roman ships, taking advantage of the monsoon winds, sailed to ports on India's southwestern coast like. There they loaded their holds with black pepper, precious gems, fine cotton textiles, and silks that had come overland from China. In return, Rome sent wine, glassware, and most significantly, vast quantities of gold and silver coinage. The Roman appetite for Eastern luxuries was so immense that it created a staggering trade deficit. Pliny the Elder, a Roman historian, even complained about the empire's wealth draining eastward to pay for pearls, pepper, and silks. This is why those coins are there. They were not loose change from a shipwreck, but the primary method of settling accounts, the hard currency of a globalizing economy. But what happened to the coins after they were handed over? Did they simply get melted down for their precious metal content, or did they enter local circulation? The evidence suggests they did both. Some hoards appear to be savings buried for safekeeping, perhaps by local merchants or rulers who valued the pure silver and gold. Intriguingly, some coins show signs of being tested with small chisel cuts, a practice common in India to verify the metal's purity. Others have been found pierced, possibly to be worn as jewelry or talismans. This indicates that these Roman objects were integrated into the local economic and social fabric, their value recognized far beyond the borders of the empire that minted them. Their presence from India to Vietnam is a metallic testament to the scale of this network. A system so fluid that a coin from the heart of the Mediterranean could end up as valued wealth or a pendant in a Southeast Asian marketplace. This flow of Roman specie eastward was the financial engine for a trade in spices and silks, but it was merely one current in a much older and more enduring stream of exchange. One that dealt in the most coveted substance of the ancient world, a cent more precious than gold. The Roman coins found in Vietnam were part of a financial current that flowed along a truly monumental route. While caravans crossed the deserts of Central Asia on the famed Silk Road, an equally vital network pulsed across the southern seas. A maritime Silk Road that connected the Han dynasty of China directly to the markets of the Roman Empire. This was not a single path, but a vast, interconnected web of ports and monsoon-driven voyages, the economic backbone of the classical world. It began in the bustling ports of southern China, like Guangzhou, where massive Chinese junks were loaded with the most coveted commodities of the age. Their holds were filled with bolts of shimmering silk, exquisite lacquerware, and the early, beautiful forms of Chinese ceramics. These ships did not sail directly to Rome. Instead, they embarked on a staged journey down the coast of Vietnam, a crucial first leg. Here, at the Kingdom of in the Mekong Delta, the port of it served as a powerhouse. Archaeological digs have revealed a staggering mix of cultures: Roman medallions alongside Chinese mirrors and Indian statuary, proving it was a true global crossroads. From Southeast Asia, goods and ships would catch the monsoon winds across the Bay of Bengal to the ports of the Indian subcontinent. Then, the journey continued west to places like a major port in ancient Pakistan, where goods were transferred again. This entire system relied on a chain of intermediary kingdoms. The Kushan Empire, straddling Central Asia, controlled key overland and riverine routes that fed into the maritime network, while mastery of the lower Mekong gave it immense power and wealth. These kingdoms did not just provide safe harbors, they acted as cultural and economic translators, facilitating deals between merchants who spoke different languages and hailed from worlds apart. The engine of this entire system was, once again, the predictable rhythm of the monsoon winds. Chinese and Southeast Asian sailors possessed deep knowledge of these patterns, timing their departures with precision to catch the winds that would carry them to their destinations, and then bring them home months later. This allowed for a regularity and scale of trade that is almost staggering to consider. The Roman demand for silk was so insatiable that it created a constant westward flow of luxury, paid for by a river of Roman gold and silver flowing east. This maritime Silk Road was the quiet, wet highway upon which the fortunes of empires quietly sailed, moving not just wealth, but the very art and ideas of classical antiquity across half the world. And none of it would have been possible without the most important element of all, the ships themselves. The silent trade winds would have been useless without the ships that dared to ride them. To understand these networks, we must step into the ancient shipyards and see the vessels not as simple boats, but as specialized masterpieces of engineering. Each perfectly sculpted by the ocean it was meant to conquer. In the vast Pacific, Polynesian voyagers relied on the double-hulled canoe. Picture two sleek hulls, carved from massive logs connected by a strong platform. This design provided incredible stability in the rolling swells of the open ocean, turning a precarious craft into a steady, floating island. It could carry entire families, their food, water, and precious cargo of plants and animals for months at sea. Its sail, often a triangular crabclaw shape, was a marvel of aerodynamics, catching the wind efficiently to drive the vessel forward on its star-guided path. This was a ship designed for exploration and colonization, a self-sufficient world moving across the water. Meanwhile, in the Indian Ocean, a different challenge demanded a different solution. Here, the key was mastering the monsoon's rhythm, which meant sailing against the wind during one leg of the journey. The answer was the dhow, with its distinctive triangular lateen sail. This sail could be angled with remarkable precision, allowing a skilled captain to tack against the wind, zigzagging to make headway in a way a square sail simply could not. The dhow's hull was often built with a technique called shell-first construction, where planks were sewn together with coconut fiber rope, making the vessel flexible and resilient in rough seas. It was the workhorse of the monsoon marketplace, built for reliable, seasonal voyages between known ports. Then there were the giants of Southeast Asia, These were not delicate explorers or nimble coast huggers, but massive cargo ships, some reportedly capable of carrying 500 people or hundreds of tons of goods. Built from dense, resilient teak wood, their hulls were constructed using a brilliant technique known as lashlug. Instead of using metal nails, which could rust and weaken, shipwrights would leave integral protrusions, or lugs, on the inside of the planks. They would then drill holes through these lugs and lash the planks together with flexible rattan cord, creating a hull that was both incredibly strong and slightly flexible, able to withstand the shocks of ocean travel. This same lashed lug method was used across Oceania, a tantalizing clue that shipbuilding knowledge itself was a commodity traded along these routes. These vessels were far more than transportation. They were floating communities, microcosms of their home cultures carrying not just goods, but languages, rituals, and worldviews across the waves. The ship itself was the engine of everything we've discussed, the physical key that turned the ocean from a barrier into a bridge. And within the holds of these diverse ships, one particular type of cargo was so valuable, so dense with meaning, that it could justify the immense risk of an ocean crossing. Becoming a silent currency that connected the spiritual lives of distant civilizations, a single piece of volcanic glass can hold a map of the ancient world. Obsidian, forged in the heart of a volcano and cooled into a jet-black glass, was one of the most sought-after materials in the Stone Age. When fractured, it yields edges sharper than a modern surgical scalpel, making it perfect for cutting tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. But its true value to us today is as a perfect archaeological tracer. Unlike pottery styles which can be, or stories which can change, every volcanic source of obsidian has a unique chemical fingerprint. A specific blend of elements like strontium and zirconium that is as distinctive as a barcode. Using a technique called sourcing analysis, scientists can take a tiny sliver of an obsidian artifact found on a remote island and match its chemical signature directly back to the single volcano it came from. This lets us draw lines of connection across the blue void with astonishing precision. The results have redrawn our maps of ancient mobility. One of the most dramatic trails begins in the Admiralty Islands, north of Papua New Guinea. The volcanoes there produced a particularly high-quality obsidian. Archaeologists have found tools made from this specific Admiralty Island glass recovered from sites in the heartland, and then, astonishingly, over 2,000 kilometers away to the east. On distant islands in Fiji and even Samoa, this means that a piece of rock in one specific location was carried by human hands across a staggering expanse of open ocean. It did not travel alone or by accident. The distribution pattern reveals a network, a chain of hand-to-hand exchanges or deliberate voyages that moved this valuable commodity along established routes. The presence of Admiralty obsidian in early sites tells us that, from the very beginning of Pacific expansion, these voyagers were not isolated pioneers. They were maintaining active, long-distance connections back to their source areas, returning for vital resources or trading with partners who did. This movement of a utilitarian material, not a luxury good, is profoundly revealing. A chief might trade for exotic shells to display status, but a community trades for obsidian to ensure its survival, to make the tools needed for building canoes, processing food, and crafting other goods. The consistent flow of obsidian across such vast distances points to something far more organized than chance encounters. It indicates regular, return voyages and established economic partnerships. It proves that even in the deep past, communities were enmeshed in relationships of interdependence that spanned the sea. They knew where to go, who to see, and what to offer in return. This was a working, functional economy operating on a transoceanic scale. Following these precise, scientifically drawn trails of stone forces us to look at other oceans and ask a more speculative question. If such robust networks existed in the Pacific, could similar threads have been spun across other great waters, like the Atlantic? Long before our history books say it was possible, the Atlantic Ocean presents history's greatest and most contentious maritime mystery. While the Pacific and Indian Oceans offer clear trails of pottery, plants, and coins, the Atlantic's evidence is shrouded in controversy, forcing us to navigate a treacherous strait between groundbreaking discovery and seductive myth. The central question is explosive. Could ships from Africa or Europe have reached the Americas not in 1492, but centuries or even earlier? Let's examine the most cited clues, starting with a story from In the late 1970s, a fisherman working off the coast of Brazil reportedly hauled up fragments of pottery jars, identified by some as Roman amphorae, dating potentially to around 200 years before the Common Era. If this would be a smoking gun for pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, yet the academic world met this claim with profound skepticism. The objects were not recovered by a controlled archaeological excavation. Their context is unclear, and similar pottery could have arrived much later via shipwrecks from the colonial era. Without a documented scientific recovery process, this evidence remains in the realm of intriguing anecdote, not accepted fact. On land, another piece of evidence stares out from the jungles of ancient. The Olmec civilization of Mexico created massive stone heads, each weighing many tons, with broad, distinctive facial features. Some observers have suggested these features appear African, proposing that Olmec culture was influenced by visitors from across the Atlantic. Mainstream archaeology, however, offers a different interpretation. Scholars point out that these are likely portraits of Olmec rulers, carved to reflect the local population's own diverse physical characteristics. To assign an African origin based solely on modern interpretations of stone features is to overlook the rich complexity and indigenous genius of early American civilizations. It risks replacing one mystery with a simplistic narrative that does not hold up to rigorous scrutiny. Then there are the stories written in ink and preserved by ice. The Norse sagas are not speculation. They are historical narratives describing Leif's voyage around the year 1000 to a place he called Vinland, a land of grapes and meadows. This is not a theory, it is confirmed archaeology. The settlement at Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada, is definitive proof of Norse presence in North America, 5 centuries before Columbus. But this was a foothold, a seasonal camp that did not lead to a sustained network or transform the continents. It stands as a brilliant exception that proves a rule isolated contact was possible, but it did not forge the deep, enduring threads of exchange we see in the Pacific. So where does this leave us? The overwhelming academic consensus is that there is no solid evidence for sustained, transformative pre-Columbian contact across the Atlantic. The currents and winds, particularly the North Atlantic gyre, could indeed have carried a vessel from Africa to the Americas by accident. An individual voyage of survival is absolutely within the realm of possibility, but a single shipwreck does not make a trade network. The difference between a lone, desperate arrival and a purposeful, two-way exchange of goods and ideas is the entire story. This debate highlights the fine line we must walk, embracing the genuine mystery of human movement while rigorously separating robust archaeology from nationalistic or sensationalist speculation. It teaches us that the absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence, but that extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. While the Atlantic remains a foggy realm of maybe, the Pacific offers something far clearer, a map written not in contested artifacts, but in a stunning and unified artistic vision that spread across thousands of miles of open sea. In the swirling currents of the archipelago, a different kind of network thrived, one where value was measured not in coin, but in honor. Here, in the islands of Papua New Guinea, the Kula ring wove a vast social ocean. For generations, master sailors embarked on dangerous, open-sea voyages in elegant canoes, not to trade for food or tools, but to exchange two sacred objects, white shell armbands called, and red shell necklaces called. An armband traveled one direction around a great ceremonial circle of islands, the necklace traveled the opposite way, and the men who carried them were bound by a sacred code. This was not commerce. A Kula partner could not haggle or refuse a gift when offered. He could only accept it with grace, knowing he was now obligated to reciprocate in the future with an object of equal or greater prestige. The entire system was a brilliant, non-economic engine for building society. It created lifelong partnerships, called, between men on distant islands, forging alliances that prevented conflict and ensured safe passage. A man's status was not defined by how much he owned, but by the history of the objects he temporarily held, each armband and necklace carrying the names and legends of all its previous, illustrious keepers. These voyages mapped a sacred geography onto the sea. The routes were traditional and precise, requiring deep knowledge of navigation, weather, and the complex social etiquette of each island visited. The journey itself was a ritual, a test of skill and courage that reinforced the seafaring identity of the entire region. And while the ceremonial exchange was the sacred core, it facilitated a bustling practical trade on the margins. As the canoes traveled the Kula circuit, they also carried essential goods, pots from one island, timber from another, foodstuffs from a third. The spiritual journey made the practical exchange possible and safe. The Kula ring reveals a profound truth about these ancient networks. The deepest purpose of connection could be social glue and spiritual meaning, creating bonds of obligation and respect that were far stronger than any simple business transaction. It wove isolated islands into a single community with a shared ritual language. This stands in beautiful contrast to a network driven by a very different force, not by social honor, but by an empire's overwhelming desire for a single, fragrant substance. The scent of a temple could travel across a continent. In the sun-baked mountains of southern Arabia, a region the Romans called Arabia, or Fortunate Arabia, grew trees that produced the most valuable substances in the ancient world. From the gnarled bark of the tree came frankincense, and from the tree myrrh. These were not mere perfumes. They were sacred resins, the very breath of ritual, burned in temples from Babylon to Rome and used in embalming practices in Egypt. Their source was a fiercely guarded secret, confined to this one harsh, beautiful corner of the world, making them worth far more than their weight in gold. To get these resins to the distant temples that craved them, an extraordinary network sprang to life, one that moved across both scorching desert and open sea. The legendary overland caravan routes are the stuff of epic tales. Camel trains, laden with sacks of precious resin, would embark on a months-long journey north along the spine of the Arabian Peninsula. They faced scorching heat, bandits, and the relentless thirst of the desert, stopping at fortified oasis cities like Petra, the magnificent capital of the Nabateans carved into rose-red cliffs. Petra thrived as a tax station and trading hub, its wealth literally built on the scent of incense. But there was another, equally vital path. From ports like on the Yemeni coast, Arab and Indian sailors loaded frankincense and myrrh onto sturdy dhows. They caught the monsoon winds to sail across the Arabian Sea to the western coast of India. This was not a one-way trip. In India, they would pick up other coveted goods, like fine cotton textiles, precious pearls from the Gulf, and spices. Then the winds would reverse, carrying these ships back to Arabia, where the goods would join the caravan routes heading to the Mediterranean or be shipped up the Red Sea. This created a brilliant, interconnected system, land and sea routes working in tandem to feed a global appetite. The wealth this generated was staggering. It funded powerful, sophisticated kingdoms like Saba, the land of the biblical queen of Sheba, whose people built great dams and temples with the profits of the incense trade. The Roman Empire's insatiable demand for incense for its countless state rituals fully integrated southern Arabia into a global economy, with Roman merchants even establishing trading posts on the coast. This network linked the priest in a Roman temple, the sailor on the Arabian Sea, and the resin tapper in a remote wadi into a single chain of desire. It was a web spun from ritual necessity and commercial genius, proving that the most powerful connections could begin with something as fragile as a drop of fragrant sap. And just as a scent could motivate empires, so too could a flash of deep blue light from a stone mined at the roof of the world. The deepest blue in the ancient world came from a single, remote valley. High in the mountains in what is now Afghanistan, miners toiled in treacherous tunnels to extract a stone that held the night sky within it. Lapis lazuli, with its brilliant, celestial blue flecked with golden pyrite like scattered stars, was more than a gem. It was a piece of the heavens made solid, and for over 3,000 years, it was desired by every great civilization from the Nile to the Indus. Its journey is in the endurance of these forgotten networks, proving that a single commodity could weave together continents across. The geography itself tells a story of incredible effort. The lapis mines were a geographic bottleneck, a solitary source for a color the entire ancient world craved. To reach the royal workshops of Egypt or the temples of Mesopotamia, this stone had to travel over 1,500 miles through some of the most forbidding terrain on Earth. Archaeologists traced two probable superhighways for this blue treasure. The primary northern route was overland. Caravans would carry sacks of raw lapis west from the mines, across the Iranian plateau, finally reaching the great cities of Mesopotamia like and Babylon. Here, master craftsmen would carve it into beads, cylinder seals, and inlays for the eyes of statues, believing the stone's divine color held protective power. But that was only half the journey for stone destined for Egypt. From Mesopotamia, the lapis could travel southwest through the Levant, passing through a chain of trading cities before crossing the Sinai into the Nile Delta. Alternatively, a more southerly and intriguing route may have existed. Raw lapis could have first traveled southeast from the mines, down into the thriving Indus Valley civilization. There, in cities like Harappa, it could be worked and then loaded onto ships at their coastal ports. These ships would then catch the monsoon winds to sail across the Arabian Sea, perhaps to ports in Oman or Bahrain, where the stone entered the existing maritime networks that connected to both Mesopotamia and, eventually, Egypt. This was not a one-time event, but a constant flow. We find lapis lazuli in the royal tombs of from 2,500 years before the Common Era. We find it in the funeral mask of the Egyptian boy king over 1,000 years later. We find it in Mycenaean Greece and even in a burial site from ancient Britain. This continuity is the true revelation. It means that for dozens of generations, through the rise and fall of empires, the knowledge of where to get this stone and how to move it was never lost. The routes were maintained, the partnerships renewed, the value understood. This was a network with institutional memory, a quiet, persistent thread in the fabric of history. The stone's value explains its relentless travel. Lapis was not merely decorative. In Egypt, it was associated with the night sky and the heavens, a symbol of cosmic order. Powdered, it made the vibrant ultramarine pigment used to paint the headdresses of gods and pharaohs in temple murals. In Mesopotamia, it was sacred to the goddess, and used in the eyes of cult statues, believing the deities' gaze literally shone through this celestial stone. This was trade driven by cosmology, by a shared human desire to capture the divine in a tangible object. The immense labor of its journey, from a dark Afghan mine to a sun-drenched Egyptian tomb, was justified because it carried meaning as dense as its own deep color. And that journey forces us to pause and consider the human links in this chain. We can follow the stone's path on a map, but we must imagine the miner in the mountain pass, the caravan driver bargaining at a desert oasis, the merchant haggling on a Mesopotamian quay, the sailor stowing a small, precious pouch in his dhow, and the royal jeweler in Thebes carefully setting a fragment into a golden pectoral. These individuals, separated by language, culture, and thousands of miles, were all connected by a shared understanding of this blue stone's worth. They facilitated an exchange that transformed raw earth into ultimate symbol, proving that the most enduring networks were built not just on roots, but on a common vision of what was beautiful and sacred. Behind every traded sack of pepper or lapis bead stood a person who knew how to speak two worlds. The grand networks we map were animated by flesh and blood communities, merchant diasporas who planted themselves in foreign soil to become the living nodes of connection. These were not just traveling salesmen, they were cultural translators, settling in foreign ports and creating enduring enclaves that turned chance encounters into reliable systems. Take the Tamil merchants from India's southern coast. From at least the first few centuries of the Common Era, they established thriving outposts across Southeast Asia. In places like the ancient kingdom of, these communities did far more than trade. They brought with them the concepts of Hinduism and Buddhism, influencing local kingship and temple architecture. They introduced Sanskrit as a language of court and religion, and their scripts became the basis for writing systems across the region. A trader from Gujarat might broker a deal for Sumatran camphor, but in doing so, he also shared a culinary technique or a story from the Ramayana, weaving Indian cosmology into the local cultural fabric. Their presence provided a constant, trusted link that made the monsoon-driven trade predictable and safe. Across the other side of the world, another diaspora performed a similar miracle of connectivity. From roughly the 8th to the 10th centuries, a network of Jewish merchants known as the operated a truly staggering trade circuit. Their documented routes, described by contemporary geographers, connected the Frankish kingdoms of Europe all the way to China. They spoke multiple languages, from Arabic and Persian to Old French, and perhaps even Slavic tongues. This linguistic skill was their superpower. A merchant could travel from the markets of to the courts of Baghdad, acting as a neutral intermediary in a fragmented world. They carried extraordinary goods, European furs and swords eastward, and Asian spices, silks and musk westward. Critically, they also moved letters and payments across continents, functioning as an early financial network. Their existence highlights how these middlemen thrived in the spaces between empires, maintaining lines of communication even when political landscapes were in flux. And of course, we cannot forget the master architects of Mediterranean connectivity, the Phoenicians. From their city-states like Tyre and Sidon, they established colonies from North Africa to Sicily, Sardinia, and even southern Spain. Carthage itself began as a Phoenician trading post. These were not mere supply stations, they were permanent settlements that replicated Phoenician culture abroad. They spread their alphabetic writing system, which would later be adapted by the Greeks and become the ancestor of our own. They traded their famous purple dye, glass, and cedar wood, but more importantly, they created a standardized commercial language and a web of kinship that made the entire Mediterranean a Phoenician marketplace. What was the secret glue that held these diasporas together? It was trust, built on shared identity, religion, and family ties. A merchant in a foreign port could rely on the word of a fellow community member because their reputations were intertwined. They developed common commercial laws and dispute resolution methods that functioned across borders. They became experts in local customs, learning what was considered valuable or offensive, smoothing over transactions that might otherwise falter on cultural misunderstandings. In essence, they built a soft infrastructure of relationships that was far more resilient than any single treaty or royal decree. They were the human operating system for ancient globalization, ensuring that the exchange of goods always included an exchange of ideas. To truly find them, however, we must leave the dusty ports and look to where their world often met a sudden end, beneath the silent surface of the sea, the hold's archives more complete than any library on land. When a ship sank in the ancient world, it did not just vanish. It became a time capsule, sealed under layers of silt or in the cold, dark stillness of the deep sea, preserving a single, frozen moment in the flow of global trade. This is the domain of underwater archaeology, where sunken ships offer us an unparalleled snapshot of what was actually moving across the oceans, down to the last ceramic bowl and sailor's personal belonging. Take the Belitung shipwreck, discovered off the coast of Indonesia. This was a 9th century Arab dhow, a vessel of the Monsoon trade, whose wooden hull had long since dissolved, but whose cargo remained perfectly stacked on the seabed. It held a staggering 60,000 pieces of Chinese Tang Dynasty ceramics, from elegant bowls to massive storage jars, all destined for the Middle Eastern market. But the real story was in the mix. Alongside this bulk Chinese export were dazzling gold and silver vessels from Persia, and lumps of raw star anise, a spice. This one wreck captures the entire chain of the maritime silk road in a single cargo hold, proof that Arab merchants were directly fetching luxury goods from China themselves. Even earlier, and perhaps more mysterious, is the shipwreck off the coast of Turkey. Dating to the late 14th century before the Common Era, this was a late Bronze Age vessel carrying a king's ransom of raw materials. Its hull was packed with 10 tons of Cypriot copper ingots, a ton of tin ingots from likely Afghanistan, ebony logs from Africa, ivory tusks, glass ingots from Mesopotamia, and amber from the Baltic. It was a floating warehouse of international commodities, a direct manifest of the complex, palace-driven trade that linked empires from Egypt to the Aegean. These wrecks do more than list goods, they whisper about the crew. On the ship, archaeologists found personal seals from Mesopotamia, a stone anchor from Cyprus, and sets of weights for measuring precious metals. Telling a story of a multicultural crew conducting business across cultures. On the Belitung dhow, the presence of inkstones and precisely stacked bowls suggests a highly organized commercial operation. Finding these submerged archives, however, requires technology as advanced as the ancient navigation it studies. Modern maritime archaeology uses side-scan sonar to map the like a detailed ultrasound, magnetometers to detect the faint magnetic signature of iron artifacts buried in sediment, and remote-operated vehicles, or ROVs, robotic eyes and hands that can explore depths too dangerous for human divers. These tools allow researchers to survey and excavate with meticulous care, plotting every artifact's position to understand how the ship sank and what happened in its final moments. Each carefully raised object, from a gold cup to a simple wooden pulley, is a piece of a puzzle, but sometimes the most common finds are the most puzzling. Amidst the famous treasures, archaeologists often recover humble artifacts of unknown purpose, strange tools, or unidentifiable organic lumps that remind us how much of daily life and technology on these ancient highways remains lost to time. These silent wrecks ask us to reconsider what we label as treasure, pushing us to look beyond gold and ceramics to the very structure of the ships themselves, where another form of priceless evidence is often hiding in plain sight. A clay pot from ancient Mexico holds a face marked with intricate spirals. This is pottery, specifically from a cultural phase in West Mexico, and to some observers, the designs are uncannily familiar. The patterns adorning these figures with their precise dots, concentric circles, and sweeping curvilinear lines bear a striking visual resemblance to the traditional tattooing, or of Polynesia. The theory is as tantalizing as it is contentious. Could these pots be a record of contact, a captured moment where a Polynesian voyager's tattooed visage was immortalized in clay by an artist? Proponents of this idea point to the specificity of the motifs. They argue that the complex geometric arrangements on the pottery are not generic, but mirror the sacred, symbolic language etched into Polynesian skin, a language of genealogy, status, and connection to the gods. It is a compelling visual echo across an ocean. Yet, the academic world meets this theory with extreme caution, and for a critical reason. While the sweet potato and the chicken provide biological evidence, a genetic or botanical trail we can follow, these pottery designs are art. And art is a realm of interpretation, vulnerable to what scholars call pareidolia, the human tendency to see meaningful patterns where none may exist. The fundamental problem is a lack of corroborating evidence. If Polynesians made landfall in the Americas, even briefly, we would expect to find some tangible trace of their presence beyond artistic influence. A fragment of a distinct Polynesian, a piece of basalt adze sourced to a Pacific island quarry, or the remains of a Polynesian-style canoe would be a smoking gun. To date, no such artifact has been conclusively identified in pre-Columbian archaeological contexts in the Americas. This creates a stark contrast in the weight of evidence. The chicken and sweet potato are what we might call closed systems. A chicken either has a genetic lineage leading back across the Pacific or it does not. A sweet potato is botanically from South America, so its presence in Polynesia requires a physical transfer. They are concrete problems with traceable solutions. Artistic style, however, is an open system. Similar visual solutions can arise independently when human cultures explore universal themes like symmetry, rhythm, and the representation of the human form. A spiral can symbolize the sun, the ocean, or a fern frond in countless cultures without any of them ever having met. The pottery mystery perfectly encapsulates the historian's dilemma. We are presented with a haunting visual parallel that feels too specific to ignore, yet it stands alone, without the hard, corroborating evidence needed to build a solid case. It reminds us that the past often speaks in whispers and hints, and our desire to connect the dots must be tempered by rigorous skepticism. This challenge of separating coincidence from connection forces us to look for exchanges that left a different, more indelible kind of mark, one that transformed the very landscape and diet of entire continents. Their voyages carried entire worlds in the hulls of their canoes. The Austronesian-speaking peoples, beginning their expansion from Taiwan around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, were not merely explorers, they were ecological architects. Their strategy for settling the planet's greatest ocean was breathtakingly simple and profoundly radical. They did not adapt to unknown islands and hope to survive on what they found. Instead, they brought their known world with them. This was a transported landscape, a complete agricultural and biological package carefully curated for transplantation across the sea. In their sailing canoes, they carried the cuttings of staple crops, taro, yam, banana, and breadfruit, plants that could provide reliable carbohydrates in a new land. They brought the coconut palm, a tree of life that offered food, water, fiber, and wood. And they brought animal companions, dogs, pigs, and the hardy red, the ancestor of all domestic chickens. This was not an accident of travel, it was the core of their colonization plan. Before setting sail for a new island, they would have prepared these living cargoes with as much care as they prepared their water and navigational charts. Upon landing, the first task was not to hunt or forage, but to garden, to clear land and plant their familiar crops, establishing a food base that would allow a community to take root and thrive. This deliberate act transformed the islands they reached. It created an instant, recognizable homeland in the middle of the blue wilderness. A settler on a remote atoll in the Central Pacific could look out at a grove of breadfruit trees and banana plants and feel a tangible connection to the culture they had left behind. A culture now literally growing from the same soil. This biological network had a culinary consequence, creating a shared foundational diet across a staggering portion of the globe. From Madagascar in the west to Easter Island in the east, a distance covering more than half the Earth's circumference, people were eating foods descended from the same original stock. They were cooking in similar earth ovens, using related words for these staples, and building societies upon this common agricultural calendar. The dispersal of the coconut alone maps their influence like a genetic breadcrumb trail, following human migration from Southeast Asia across the Indian Ocean to Africa and all the way across the Pacific. Their success rewrites the story of human migration. It shows that the most enduring connections are often ecological, woven not through treaties or trade goods, but through the shared cultivation of the same plants and the husbandry of the same animals. This was a network of sustenance, a quiet, green web that made the vast ocean feel like a series of interconnected gardens. It provided the material foundation that allowed social and spiritual networks to flourish. And while the Austronesians were spreading life across the waves, another ancient network was moving something very different, not the stuff of physical survival, but the powerful, intangible force of faith. A sacred text could travel as safely as a bolt of silk in a merchant's hold. While we often picture Buddhist monks traversing the dusty overland Silk Road, an equally vital journey was happening on the water. The spread of Buddhism from India across Asia was profoundly accelerated by the very same maritime networks that moved spices and gemstones. Merchant ships became the unsung vehicles of faith, carrying not just goods, but the entire apparatus of a spiritual tradition to distant shores. Ports transformed from mere commercial hubs into radiant centers of learning and translation. Take Anuradhapura in Sri. By the 3rd century before the Common Era, it had become a major Buddhist kingdom and a crucial. Chinese pilgrims like the famous monk, sailing to India in the 5th century to collect sacred texts, would stop here first. He described a magnificent stupa adorned with gold and silver, a beacon for devotees from across the seas. Further east, the maritime empire of, based in Sumatra, rose to power between the 7th and 13th centuries by controlling the vital Strait of Malacca. But was more than a toll gate for trade. It became a renowned international university for Buddhist studies. Monks from as far away as China would disembark here, sometimes staying for years to study under master scholars and translate Sanskrit texts into their own languages before continuing their journey to India or returning home. This was a seamless fusion of commerce and conversion. A merchant, grateful for a safe voyage or seeking spiritual merit, would readily offer passage to a monk. The monk's presence on the ship was considered auspicious, a living blessing for the journey. In turn, the ship's hold provided safe, dry storage for priceless cargo, palm leaf manuscripts containing the Buddha's teachings, or small, revered relics. Upon reaching a foreign port, wealthy merchants often donated generously to the construction of local temples and monasteries, cementing their commercial relationships with spiritual patronage and earning respect within their new communities. This practice wove Buddhist ideology directly into the economic fabric of Asia. A trader from Gujarat might fund a stupa in a Sumatran port, and a Chinese merchant might endow a monastery in Sri, creating a shared spiritual geography that transcended political borders. This network of faith, riding the monsoon winds, ensured that Buddhism did not spread as a rigid monolithic doctrine, but as a living, adapting tradition. Carried and shaped by the very people who moved across the ocean's highways, and where faith traveled, its visual language followed inevitably in its wake. The serene cross-legged figure sits in meditation, a pose of perfect stillness found in stone a world apart. In the temples of ancient India and Cambodia, sculptures of deities and enlightened beings are depicted in the lotus position, a sacred posture representing spiritual attainment. Yet remarkably similar seated figures appear in the art of the classic Maya, rulers or gods shown with legs crossed, hands resting on their knees, in a pose of authority and contemplation. This visual echo across hemispheres is one of the most persistent and debated artistic mysteries. So too is the prevalence of the feathered serpent, a powerful deity known as In, whose imagery shares a striking conceptual space with the dragon serpents, or Nagas, of Asian mythology. Beings often associated with water, wisdom, and the underworld. Scholars approach these parallels with profound caution, aware of the powerful human tendency to find meaningful connections in coincidence, a psychological pattern called pareidolia. A spiral can symbolize the sun, a whirlpool, or a fern in countless cultures without any contact. The challenge is to distinguish these universal symbols from what some researchers call complex motifs. Artistic conventions so detailed and specific that independent invention becomes a less satisfying explanation. A simple spiral is one thing, but a specific seated posture combined with intricate hand gestures, or a serpent deity adorned with identical symbolic plumage and associated with reign and kingship, gives pause. This is the realm of tantalizing possibility, where the evidence is etched in art, not genetics or pottery, and therefore forever open to interpretation. Some theorists propose these are glimpses of a very ancient, shared symbolic language, archetypes that diffused across the globe in the deep mists of prehistory through limited, now forgotten contact. Others maintain that the human mind, faced with similar existential questions about power, the cosmos, and the divine, simply arrived at similar artistic solutions. The truth may be a subtle blend, where some motifs are universal and others are whispers of real, but sparse and ancient encounters. These artistic echoes remind us that the past communicates in a language of symbols, and we are still learning to read its grammar. While art leaves us with haunting questions, a newer science is providing answers written in the most fundamental code of all, the one contained within us. Our deepest history is written not in stone or clay, but within us. A revolutionary scientific field now allows us to read that history by analyzing the DNA of both ancient remains and living populations. This gives us a biological ledger, a record of human journeys inscribed in the very building blocks of life, offering a powerful new lens to view these forgotten trade networks. In the vast Pacific, genetic studies have provided stunning confirmation of the story. By examining the DNA of modern Polynesian populations and comparing it to ancient skeletal remains, researchers can trace a clear lineage back through time and across the ocean. The genetic markers tell a story of rapid expansion from a founding population, moving from island to island in a wave that matches the archaeological trail of pottery. It reveals not just a migration, but a pattern of settlement where new islands were often founded by small, closely related groups, whose descendants then maintained loose but traceable genetic connections across the sea for generations. This genetic map validates the epic narrative of deliberate exploration and colonization, showing that the ocean highways were traveled by families carrying their future in their canoes and in their genes. Perhaps the most dramatic genetic signature of all is found far to the west, on the island of Madagascar. The people of Madagascar speak a language that belongs to the Austronesian family, whose roots lie in distant Southeast Asia. For a long time, this was a profound linguistic puzzle. How could an island right off the coast of Africa have a population whose ancestral language came from across the entire Indian Ocean? Provided the definitive answer. Studies of the Malagasy people reveal a clear genetic blend, with approximately half of their ancestry tracing back to the islands of Borneo in Indonesia. This is not the result of slow, creeping contact along coastlines. This genetic evidence points to a direct, transoceanic migration, likely around 1,200 years ago, where Indonesian sailors made the incredible journey across the Indian Ocean on the monsoon winds and settled the island. They brought not only their language and genes, but also their transported landscape, introducing staple crops like rice, bananas, and taro to a new continent. This genetic clue solves a centuries-old mystery, proving that the Indian Ocean network was capable of moving not just goods, but entire communities across its breadth. When we turn to the possibility of pre-Columbian contact between Polynesia and the Americas, the genetic picture becomes more nuanced, a conversation rather than a declaration. Researchers have looked for a Polynesian genetic signal in the DNA of indigenous South American populations. Some studies have suggested a faint, ancient trace of Polynesian ancestry in a few groups, particularly in coastal regions. This potential signal is incredibly subtle, indicating that if contact occurred, it was likely limited, involving small groups whose genetic contribution was absorbed into a much larger population over time. It does not point to a mass migration or colonization, but perhaps to a few successful voyages where individuals stayed and had families. Other studies have found no such evidence, highlighting the ongoing scientific debate. What genetics does clearly show, however, is a later and well-documented contact, the genetic legacy of the Norse settlement at Meadows, which left a brief but identifiable mark in the DNA of some Icelandic populations, a ghost of a meeting between Vikings and indigenous Americans. The power of DNA is that it provides a different kind of evidence, one that complements pottery shards and chicken bones. It can confirm large-scale movements, as in the Pacific and Madagascar, and it can test the intimate biological consequences of proposed contacts elsewhere. It reminds us that these networks were ultimately about people, whose relationships and families created a living tapestry of connection. And as we follow these threads of ancestry, we are led to wonder about the other, invisible cargo they carried, the knowledge and ideas that flowed along these same routes, shaping the intellectual foundations of the ancient world. The most valuable cargo on these ancient ships required no space in the hold. While merchants traded in spices and silks, a far more transformative exchange was happening quietly among them, a trade in the very architecture of knowledge. Astronomy, mathematics, and the secrets of the sea were the ultimate intellectual capital, flowing along the same routes as material goods, silently accelerating the progress of civilizations a world apart. Consider the stars. Babylonian astronomers, meticulous observers of the night sky for centuries, developed sophisticated systems for predicting planetary movements and eclipses. This celestial knowledge did not stay confined to Mesopotamia. It traveled eastward along trade routes, likely carried by scholars accompanying merchant caravans or embedded in the texts traded between royal courts. In India, these Babylonian ideas merged with local astronomical traditions, leading to groundbreaking advances in mathematics and cosmology documented in texts like the. From India, this enriched knowledge pool may have flowed further east, influencing Chinese astronomical thought. This was not plagiarism, but a collaborative, centuries-long conversation about the cosmos conducted across continents. The journey of a single mathematical concept reveals this intellectual network in stunning clarity. The idea of zero, or as a numeral and a placeholder, was fully developed in India by the middle of the first millennium. It was a revolutionary leap, the key to our modern decimal system. This concept did not spread by conquest, but by commerce and scholarship. Indian mathematicians and their texts traveled west into the Islamic world, where scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated and expanded upon them. From there, the numeral system, including zero, was carried by Muslim traders across the Mediterranean into Europe, where it eventually replaced the cumbersome Roman numerals. The number that meant nothing changed everything, and its path was paved by trade routes. But the most immediate and vital knowledge exchanged was how to navigate the highways themselves. Each great seafaring culture developed its own genius for wayfinding, and fragments of this wisdom likely spread at crowded ports. Polynesian navigators used a mental star compass, dividing the horizon into precise houses where specific stars would rise and set, creating a celestial map etched in memory. In the Indian Ocean, Arab sailors used a simple yet brilliant wooden card and knotted string to measure the altitude of the North Star and determine their latitude, allowing them to sail straight across open water rather than hug the coast. And from China came an invention that would eventually redefine global exploration, the magnetic compass. Initially used for geomancy and land surveying, Chinese sailors began using the south-pointing spoon, a lodestone device, for maritime navigation by the 11th century. Knowledge of this miraculous tool, a needle that always knew north, likely diffused westward through the maritime Silk Road, reaching the Middle East and then Europe, where it would fuel the age of discovery. This was the silent trade's highest yield, the sharing of tools to see the world. When sailors shared a star chart or demonstrated a navigating device, they were not just offering a route, they were offering freedom, the power to conquer the immense and terrifying blue. And if you could share the secrets of the stars and the seas, you would inevitably share the stories you told beneath them. The stories we tell about the world may be the oldest cargo of all. From the shores of Mesopotamia to the highlands of, and the scattered islands of Polynesia, humanity shares a deep, resonant memory of a great flood. The details vary: a wrathful deity, a warning from a god, a single family saved in a boat, but the core narrative is unmistakably the same. A deluge rises to cleanse the earth, and a remnant survives to begin the world anew. This is not an isolated tale, it is a global chorus. We find it in the Epic of Gilgamesh, in the biblical story of Noah, in the Mayan, and in the flood tradition of the Maori of New Zealand. The sheer geographic spread presents a tantalizing puzzle. Could this be evidence of a single, cataclysmic event so profound that every culture preserved its echo? Some researchers point to the possibility of localized but devastating post-ice age sea level rise or catastrophic regional tsunamis. Experiences so traumatic they became etched into the foundational stories of countless peoples. This explanation relies on a shared human psychology, the universal experience of facing nature's overwhelming power, and the profound need to explain it through myth. The ocean itself, vast and unpredictable, naturally breeds tales of both peril and salvation. Yet another possibility whispers across the waves. What if the story itself traveled? Imagine an ancient trader sharing tales with his hosts at a foreign port. He recounts the legend of his homeland, a story of a great flood and a surviving ark. The story captivates his listeners, resonates with their own fears of the sea, and is retold, adapting to local gods and landscapes over generations. In this view, myths become the folklore footprint of ancient mobility, narrative seeds carried on the same currents that moved obsidian and spices. The same pattern appears with the archetype of the hero's journey, particularly across waters. From the Greek Odysseus to the Polynesian demigod Maui, heroes embark on perilous sea voyages, face monstrous creatures of the deep, and return transformed, often with a boon for their people. This narrative structure speaks to a universal human experience, the journey into the unknown and the return with hard-won knowledge. But again, specific parallels give us pause. Consider the act of stealing fire. In Greek mythology, the Titan Prometheus defies Zeus to bring fire, the spark of civilization, to humanity. In Polynesian tradition, the trickster hero Maui also captures fire, often by tricking or battling a fire goddess. Both figures are cultural benefactors who secure a fundamental technology for their people through cunning and daring. Is this pure coincidence, the independent invention of a story to explain the origins of a vital technology? Or could it be a fragment of an immensely old narrative that drifted with some of humanity's earliest voyages, evolving into Prometheus in one branch of the world and Maui in another? Scholars rightly urge caution. The human mind is a powerful pattern-making machine, and similar environments and challenges can produce similar stories. A flood myth is an obvious way to explain fossil shells found on mountain tops, or to make sense of ancestral memories of rising seas. A fire-stealing tale is a dramatic explanation for the controlled use of a terrifying natural force. These stories fulfill deep psychological and explanatory needs. Yet, when we see such specific narrative parallels between cultures separated by entire oceans, layered atop the genetic and botanical evidence for contact, it becomes harder to dismiss them entirely. They represent the most fragile, yet most persistent, layer of evidence for connection, the exchange of imagination itself. These myths are the soft echoes of hard voyages, reminding us that when ancient mariners met, they exchanged more than goods. They exchanged the very frameworks through which they understood creation, catastrophe, and courage. And just as a shared story could bind distant cultures, so too could a shared craving, one so powerful it could make men risk everything to sail beyond the edge of the known world. A single nutmeg could purchase a small farm in medieval Europe. This staggering value began in a speckled archipelago most of the world never knew existed. The Maluku Islands, a scattered chain of volcanic land in eastern Indonesia, were the sole source of the most coveted flavors on Earth. Here and only here grew the clove tree and the nutmeg, a spice so precious its fruit yielded two treasures, the nutmeg seed itself and the lacy red mace that enveloped it. For thousands of years, these islands were a secret garden, a biological monopoly that would quietly dictate the flow of wealth across hemispheres. The journey of a single clove bud from a Maluku tree to an Egyptian embalmer or a Roman noble's kitchen is in the complexity of ancient networks. No single merchant made the entire trip. Instead, it was a relay race across cultures. Local tribes in the harvested and cured the spices, then traded them to seafaring merchants from Java. These Javanese sailors, masters of the archipelago's waters, carried the precious cargo west to the Strait of Sumatra or directly to ports on the Indian coast. There, Indian merchants, deeply integrated into the monsoon-driven circuits of the Indian Ocean, would purchase the spices and transport them across the Arabian Sea to ports in southern Arabia or the Horn of Africa. Finally, Arab traders, the gatekeepers to the Mediterranean world, would broker the final leg, moving the spices up the Red Sea or across the deserts to the markets of Alexandria and from there to Rome. At every handoff, the value exponentially. By the time a small pouch of nutmeg reached a Roman chef, it was worth more than gold by weight. Its uses were as varied as its journey. In Egypt, cloves were valued for their preservative and aromatic qualities in ceremonial practices. In Rome, they were a flaunt of extreme wealth, used to season wines, sauces, and even to freshen the breath at banquets. But for all their lavish use, the true origin of these spices remained a mystery wrapped in deliberate legend. Arab and later European traders spun fantastic tales to protect their lucrative middleman roles. They spoke of mythical birds that gathered the spices from inaccessible valleys, or of groves guarded by poisonous serpents. These stories were commercial strategy, designed to deter competitors and maintain a monopoly on knowledge. This early spice trade was a quiet prelude to the violent colonial wars that would erupt over 1,000 years later. It proved that the desire for flavor, for a taste of the exotic, could be a geopolitical force powerful enough to draw maps and launch armadas. The networks built to move these fragrant commodities were shrouded in secrecy, yet they bound the planet in an intricate web of taste and desire. And just as the pursuit of flavor could connect continents, so too could the lust for a substance that gleamed not in the kitchen, but in the darkness of the earth. The true foundation of the ancient world was forged in fire and alloy. Bronze, the metal that defined an entire age, was never a simple discovery. It was a geopolitical equation, a formula that demanded ingredients from opposite ends of the known world. Copper was relatively common, found in places like Cyprus, whose very name comes from the word for copper, and in the Alps. But tin, the magic element that transformed soft copper into hard, durable bronze, was exceedingly rare. Only a handful of sources existed, in distant Afghanistan, perhaps in Cornwall in far western Britain, and in pockets of Central Asia. From the very moment a smith first created bronze, around 3,000 years before the Common Era, long-distance trade was not a luxury, it was an absolute necessity. No single kingdom possessed both crucial metals. This simple fact of chemistry birthed the world's first integrated economic system, a Bronze Age world system that linked empires through a relentless hunger for raw material. Think of it as a planetary supply chain operating 4,000 years ago. Mines in the remote mountains of Afghanistan produced tin, which was packed onto donkeys for a grueling overland trek to the Indus Valley cities like Harappa. There, it might be traded for finely crafted goods and then moved onward by ship across the Arabian Sea. Meanwhile, Cypriot copper, cast into distinctive ox-hide-shaped ingots for easy transport, was loaded onto ships like the vessel we discussed, sailing to the ports of the Levant and Anatolia. In mighty Mesopotamia, the kings of empires like Assyria and Babylon needed a constant flow of both metals to equip their armies with weapons, to craft tools for their monumental building projects, and to produce the ceremonial objects that displayed their power. Their demand pulled these streams of metal across continents. The Indus Valley civilization likely acted as a crucial intermediary, funneling Afghan tin into the maritime networks of the Persian Gulf. The Minoans of Crete and later the Mycenaeans of Greece became masters of the Mediterranean copper trade. This created a web of profound interdependence. A disruption in the tin mines of Afghanistan could literally stall the production of weapons in Anatolia. A drought in Cyprus could threaten the economy of Egypt. These civilizations, for all their unique cultures and languages, were bound together in a silent, metallic embrace. The sheer weight of this trade demanded the most efficient transport possible, and that meant the sea. Maritime routes were the superhighways of the Bronze Age. The Persian Gulf buzzed with traffic moving copper from Oman and toward Mesopotamia. The Mediterranean became a liquid bridge, with ships like the carrying tons of copper and tin ingots alongside ivory, glass, and amber in a single, staggering cargo. These were not occasional ventures. They were scheduled, protected commercial runs, likely organized by palace authorities who understood that metal was the lifeblood of the state. The scale of this network laid the entire economic and technological groundwork for everything that followed. The classical world of Greece and Rome was built literally upon the bronze foundations of this earlier age. It proves that globalization, with all its complex dependencies and far-flung connections, is not a modern invention, but a very ancient human condition. And it forces us to ask a compelling question. If the search for known metals could create such a vast system, could the quest for rumored ones, for legendary sources of gold or tin beyond the horizon, have driven explorers to sail into the absolute unknown, sparking some of history's most speculative and forgotten voyages, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the ports of Cyprus? The Bronze Age network reveals a world already connected by necessity. Yet one civilization would take this idea of maritime connection and weave it into the very fabric of their identity, becoming the undisputed masters of the Mediterranean sea lanes. The Phoenicians emerged from the narrow coastal strip of the Levant, in cities like Tyre, Sidon, and Byblos. With little fertile land, they turned their gaze entirely to the sea, not as a barrier, but as their boundless field of opportunity. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense, seeking to rule vast inland territories. Instead, they were architects of a commercial empire, building a web of colonies that stretched from the coast of North Africa to the very pillars of Hercules at Gibraltar and beyond. Their success was built on three unparalleled strengths: revolutionary ships, a genius for trade, and a portable cultural toolkit. Their vessels were the envy of the ancient world. They built two primary types: the sturdy, rounded for hauling massive cargoes of grain or timber, and the sleek, fast bireme, a warship powered by two banks of oars and a single square sail. Designed for speed and defense against pirates, with these ships they established a chain of self-sufficient colonies. The most famous, Carthage in modern-day Tunisia, began as a trading post and grew into a powerhouse that would one day challenge Rome itself. But there were many others, on Sicily, Sardinia, and the coast of Spain at a place known today as Cadiz. Each colony was more than a warehouse, it was a piece of Phoenicia transplanted, a secure base that extended their commercial reach ever farther in search of vital resources, and what they sought defined their roots. From the murex snails found in their home waters they produced Tyrian purple, a dye so vibrant and color-fast it became the exclusive mark of royalty from Rome to Persia. They sailed to southern Spain for its rich silver mines, a source of immense wealth. And driven by the same Bronze Age hunger for tin that animated earlier networks, they likely ventured as far as Cornwall in Britain, braving the Atlantic swell to secure this essential alloying metal. Their greatest export, however, was not a dye or a metal, but an idea. The Phoenicians are credited with perfecting and spreading the first true alphabet, a system of 22 characters representing consonant sounds. This was a monumental leap from cumbersome pictographic systems like Egyptian hieroglyphs or Mesopotamian cuneiform. It was simple, efficient, and perfectly suited for recording commercial transactions. As their ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean, they brought this script with them. The Greeks adapted it, adding vowels, and from there it traveled to shape writing systems across Europe. Every letter you are reading right now owes a distant debt to a Phoenician merchant tallying jars of olive oil on a dockside tablet. This combination of commercial drive and cultural diffusion has fueled some of history's most tantalizing speculation. With their proven seafaring prowess, could the Phoenicians have ventured even farther into the Atlantic? Some theories suggest they may have reached the Azores, though archaeological evidence there is hotly debated. More controversially, a few have proposed that Phoenician or Carthaginian vessels, riding the Canary Current, might have been blown across the Atlantic to the Americas long before the Vikings or Columbus. The evidence for such a voyage, however, remains in the realm of intriguing but unverified artifact claims and ambiguous inscriptions. While proof of transatlantic travel is scant, their Mediterranean legacy is concrete and profound. The Phoenician model of maritime empire, based on trade colonies, naval power, and control of strategic waterways, became the direct blueprint for later powers like Carthage itself, and even influenced the Roman and Venetian maritime strategies. They demonstrated that political power could flow from commercial networks and nautical skill, a lesson that would echo for. This pattern of a seafaring culture using colonies to secure trade and spread its influence finds a stunning parallel, not in the inland sea of the Mediterranean, but in the vast, open waters of Southeast Asia, where another mercantile empire rose to dominate the crossroads of the world. A fleet of 1,000 ships once sailed not for conquest, but for customs control. In the early 11th century, the Chola dynasty of South India, under the ambitious Emperor Chola I, dispatched a colossal naval force across the Bay of Bengal. Their target was not a rival kingdom on the subcontinent, but the distant maritime empire centered on the island of Sumatra. This was no mere pirate raid. It was a calculated, transoceanic strike at the very heart of global trade. Power came from its stranglehold on the Strait of Malacca, the narrow funnel through which all ships sailing between China and the Indian Ocean had to pass. By controlling this choke point, grew wealthy by taxing every vessel, becoming the indispensable middleman. The Cholas, whose own ports on India's Coromandel coast buzzed with trade, decided to cut out the intermediary. Navies sailed directly to the Sumatran ports, defeating the fleet and capturing key harbors. Inscriptions boast of capturing immense treasures, from golden gates to war elephants, but the real prize was not plunder, it was the rite of passage. The Chola intervention was a bold assertion of a trade monopoly, an effort to connect their heartland directly to the sources of spice, Chinese silk, and Southeast Asian gold, without paying a toll too. This episode shatters the image of these networks as always peaceful and cooperative. It reveals them as arteries of wealth so vital that empires would project military power, across 1,000 miles of open ocean to control them. The Chola Navy did not seek to colonize Sumatra in the European sense, but to dictate terms of trade, to ensure their merchants had preferential access. In doing so, they prefigured the tactics of later European powers like the Portuguese, who would also sail into Asian waters centuries later with the explicit goal of seizing control of trade nodes by force. The Chola expeditions remind us that the quiet hum of exchange along these ocean highways could be violently interrupted by the roar of imperial ambition. The flow of spices and silks was the lifeblood of kingdoms, and whoever commanded the sea lanes commanded the economy of half the world. Yet for all the scale of imperial navies and royal monopolies, the most intimate evidence of connection is often found not in a king's treasury, but on the body of an ordinary individual. A shell bracelet from a Florida beach could end its journey on the wrist of a chief 1,000 miles inland. Some of the most compelling evidence for these ancient networks is also the most personal, the silent trade in ornaments that adorn the human body. These were not bulk commodities like grain or timber, but small, portable treasures, shells, beads, and amber, whose journeys reveal a map of desire as much as commerce. They traveled astonishing distances through a process archaeologists call down the line exchange, where an object might be traded from village to village, from hand to hand, over generations, moving far beyond the horizon of its original source. In North America, beautifully crafted shell gorgets and cups, made from the distinctive whelk shells of the Gulf of Mexico, have been found in the great ceremonial mounds of the Mississippian cultures. Places like Cahokia near modern-day St. Louis. That shell had to travel up the river systems, passing through countless communities, each adding a layer of value and meaning, before it was finally carved into a sacred emblem of power. Across the Atlantic, the same story unfolds with a fiery orange stone. Carnelian beads, meticulously drilled and polished in the workshops of ancient India, have been discovered in the royal tombs of Egypt. Their vibrant color, reminiscent of the life-giving sun, made them prized for amulets and jewelry, believed to offer protection in the journey to the afterlife. To get from the Indus Valley to the Nile Valley, these tiny, hard stones crossed mountains and seas, passing from merchant to merchant along the interconnected routes of the Bronze Age world. Perhaps the most poetic trail is that of amber, the fossilized resin of ancient pine trees that glows like captured sunlight. The primary source for the ancient world was the Baltic coast of northern Europe. Yet beads and ornaments of this golden material are found in the lavish shaft graves of Mycenaean kings in Greece, over 1,000 miles to the south. Amber does not float down a convenient river to the Mediterranean. Its path was an overland odyssey, likely moving south through Central Europe via a chain of exchanges. Each trader recognizing its magical warmth and beauty, what unites these objects is their role in answering a universal human need. They were not merely decorative. A shell ring denoted status and authority. A carnelian bead was a spiritual shield. An amber pendant might be a talisman for health or a symbol of connection to the sun. Their value was symbolic, transcending language and culture. This shared aesthetic language, this common yearning for beauty and meaning, is what powered their incredible journeys. When we hold a shell ring from Cahokia or examine a carnelian bead from a pharaoh's tomb, we are not just looking at an artifact, we are touching the end point of a vast, silent conversation that stretched across continents, a conversation about what it means to be human, to seek status, protection, and connection to something greater. This intimate trade in adornment reveals the networks at their most human scale, but it also opens a window onto a far more sobering aspect of ancient exchange. one where the commodity traded was not an object, but a person. The same currents that carried spices and silks also carried a far darker cargo. For all the wonder of shared ideas and crops, these networks of connection also enabled the forced movement of people, a shadow trade that wove suffering into the fabric of ancient globalization. In the bustling ports of the Mediterranean and the Indian Ocean, human beings were a standard commodity, listed alongside amphorae of wine and sacks of grain. The evidence is stark, etched into law codes and commercial records. In the Roman world, the demand for labor on vast agricultural estates, in mines, and in urban households fueled a massive, institutionalized slave trade. Captives from wars around the Black Sea, from Germanic tribes, and from North Africa were marched to coastal markets, where merchants purchased them for transport by ship to the heart of the empire. These voyages were a brutal inversion of the exploratory journeys we have admired, turning the ocean's highway into a corridor of captivity. This system was not confined to the West. In the Indian Ocean network, historical sources from the Abbasid period describe a significant trade in enslaved individuals from the East African coast, known then as the Land of the. These individuals were transported across the sea to work in the salt marshes of southern Mesopotamia or in domestic settings, their lives uprooted by the same monsoon winds that brought prosperity to merchants. The movement of people was not always forced, yet it could still be born from hardship or ambition. Consider the mercenary, the professional soldier who sold his skills abroad. The pharaohs of Egypt famously employed Nubian archers, renowned for their skill with the bow, as elite units in their armies. Greek hoplites, heavily armored infantrymen, were hired as guards and fighters by rulers from the Persian Empire to the courts of the pharaohs. These men traveled by sea to foreign lands, their presence a testament to a different kind of exchange, one of military technique and political loyalty traded for pay. Their service created a strange intimacy, where a soldier from Thebes might spend years defending a wall in Babylon, absorbing its culture while bringing his own. This layer of the story is a necessary, sobering correction to any romantic vision of the past. It reminds us that connectivity is a neutral force, a tool that can distribute oppression as efficiently as it spreads innovation. The networks that carried healing herbs and celestial knowledge could also carry chains and the tools of subjugation. This complexity is part of their full history, a shadow that makes the light of cultural achievement all the more remarkable, because it was not achieved in isolation, but amidst all the contradictions of human nature. These vast, enduring systems of exchange seemed like permanent features of the world, yet they were not destined to last forever. Even the most resilient threads can snap under enough pressure. For centuries, even these networks pulsed with life, carrying goods and ideas across staggering distances, but they were not invincible. They existed in a delicate balance, dependent on a stable climate for predictable harvests and sailing seasons, on political order to protect trade routes and merchants, and on the health of populations to produce, transport, and consume. When these pillars shook, the entire intricate web could unravel, sometimes with breathtaking speed. One of history's most dramatic examples is the Late Bronze Age collapse, around 1200 years before the Common Era. Across the eastern Mediterranean and Near East, mighty kingdoms like the Hittites, the Mycenaean Greeks, and the Egyptian New Kingdom faced a cascade of disasters. Climate data suggests a prolonged period of drought and famine, straining agricultural systems to the breaking point. This environmental stress likely triggered mass migrations and social unrest, giving rise to the mysterious groups Egyptian records simply call the Sea Peoples. Marauders who attacked coastal cities and disrupted the vital sea lanes. The interconnectedness that had been the Bronze Age's great strength became its fatal vulnerability. The collapse of one node in the network, perhaps a key source of tin or a major port city, created a domino effect. Trade routes seized up, the flow of essential bronze ingredients stopped, and the palace economies that depended on this long-distance exchange imploded. Literacy, complex administration, and even architectural techniques were lost in many regions, plunging areas into a period often called a Dark Age. The world shrank, and the great web of the Bronze Age was severed, its memory fading into legend. Centuries later, a different kind of catastrophe would strike another vast network. In the 6th century of the Common Era, the Roman Empire, and particularly its thriving eastern half centered on Constantinople, was a hub of the known world. Then in the year 541, the plague arrived, likely carried by rats on grain ships from Egypt. This was an early outbreak of the bubonic plague, and it spread with terrifying efficiency along the very trade routes that had been the empire's lifeline. Ports, crowded marketplaces, and bustling cities became epicenters of loss. The death toll was catastrophic, perhaps decimating a significant portion of the population. The economic and social impact was profound. With fewer people to farm, produce goods, and serve in the army, the empire's tax base and military strength eroded. Long-distance trade, now associated with mortal danger, contracted severely. The vibrant Mediterranean exchange that had defined the classical world never fully recovered its former scale, contributing to a gradual fragmentation and a more localized, inward-looking medieval period in Europe. In the Americas, a similar story of environmental stress played out with the classical Maya. Their sophisticated city-states were linked by trade in obsidian, jade, cacao, and ideas. Yet around the 9th century, many of these great urban centers were abandoned. A combination of factors, including severe prolonged drought, deforestation, and intense warfare over dwindling resources, likely led to a collapse of the political and social order that maintained their networks. Trade routes faltered, ceremonial centers fell silent, and the knowledge of their intricate calendar and writing system was largely lost, waiting centuries for rediscovery. These collapses teach us a sobering lesson. The forgetting of these ancient connections is not an accident. It is often the direct result of their disintegration. When networks fail, the constant flow of people, goods, and information that maintains shared knowledge simply stops. Within a few generations, the memory of how to build a certain type of ship, or the star path to a distant island, or the trading partner from across the sea, can fade into myth or vanish entirely. The world becomes a collection of isolated stories again, and the tapestry of the past appears to us as separate, unconnected threads. This is precisely why these networks seem so mysterious today. Their end created the historical amnesia we are now working to cure. Yet from every collapse eventually comes a rediscovery. The silence left behind eventually prompts a question, and the fragments left in the earth begin to tell a new, more connected story. A single tooth can tell the story of an entire lifetime. In a quiet laboratory, scientists use a laser to vaporize a microscopic speck of enamel from a molar found in a 2,000-year-old burial site. The analysis that follows is not about DNA, but about chemistry. As a child grows, the elements from their local food and water become locked into the layers of their teeth, creating a permanent geochemical signature. By measuring the ratios of specific isotopes, like strontium and oxygen, researchers can now read this hidden diary. They can determine if an individual grew up in one region, perhaps the highlands of Anatolia, and then spent their adult life in another, like the Nile Delta. This technique, called isotopic analysis, has turned anonymous skeletons into biographical maps. We now know of Roman soldiers who enlisted in Britain and were buried in Egypt, or of women in Bronze Age Germany whose teeth tell a story of childhood spent far to the east. This is the quiet revolution reshaping our view of the past. We are no longer just studying where objects traveled, but tracing the lives of the people who carried them, confirming that mobility was woven into the fabric of ancient societies. This personal scale of discovery is matched by a tool that sees through the very earth itself. In the dense rainforests of Central America, what looks like an unbroken green canopy hides a secret city. For centuries, the remains of vast Maya settlements lay buried under centuries of soil and vegetation, invisible to explorers on the ground. Then came LIDAR, light detection and ranging. Mounted on aircraft, this technology fires millions of laser pulses toward the ground. By measuring how long each pulse takes to bounce back, it creates a breathtakingly detailed three-dimensional map of the surface, digitally stripping away the trees to reveal the human-made landscape beneath. The results have been nothing short of revolutionary. LIDAR surveys have uncovered sprawling networks of raised causeways connecting Maya cities, proving they were linked by sophisticated road systems for trade and communication. It has revealed terraced fields on a scale that rewrites estimates of their population, and it has located forgotten ports and canals that were the hubs of their maritime commerce. This technology is not just finding lost cities. It is mapping entire forgotten economies, showing us that what we thought was wilderness was often a carefully managed, densely connected world. From the laser that reads a tooth to the laser that maps a jungle, our vision is piercing veils that once seemed impenetrable. And from the sky, another silent witness is coming into focus. Satellite imagery and aerial photography are now revealing the ghostly outlines of ancient harbors silted up for, or the faint discolorations in soil that mark the foundations of caravanserais along vanished desert routes. These tools allow archaeologists to survey vast regions quickly, identifying promising sites for ground-based excavation. We are, without question, living in a golden age of rediscovery. Each technological leap is like turning on a light in a dark room, illuminating corners of our past we never knew existed. It confirms long hypothesized routes, like the overland paths for Lapis Lazuli, and it reveals startling new ones, like potential coastal passages used by very early humans. This ongoing detective work does more than add dots to a map. It fundamentally reshapes our identity, proving that the drive to explore, to connect, and to exchange is not a modern invention, but a foundational human impulse written into our bones and etched into our landscapes. The story these fragments tell is not one of isolated first contact, but of a constant, quiet conversation. For generations, our history books have presented a clean, linear narrative. Civilizations like Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and the Maya are depicted as brilliant but separate experiments, developing in splendid isolation until the great connecting moment of Columbus or De. This is the myth of the age of discovery as a sudden awakening. What we have traced across these oceans dismantles that story completely. The evidence of sweet potatoes in Polynesia, of Roman coins in India, of Lapis Lazuli from Afghanistan in Egyptian tombs, paints a different picture. It reveals a world where contact was not a singular event, but a recurring pattern, a deep undercurrent in human history. Globalization is not a 500-year-old phenomenon. It is a 5,000-year-old process, characterized by pulses of intense connection followed by periods of forgetting, by threads that frayed and were later rewoven in different patterns. This paradigm shift changes everything. It means we must stop thinking of ancient cultures as closed systems. A farmer in ancient Oman was connected to the fortunes of a miner in Afghanistan, and a priest in Babylon through the tin in a bronze tool. A Polynesian navigator's successful voyage could introduce a new staple crop that reshaped agriculture across an entire ocean basin. These were not worlds apart. They were nodes in a vast, slow-moving network. This reshuffles historical credit away from a Eurocentric narrative. The Age of Discovery did not invent long-distance travel. It simply industrialized it, overlaying a new, aggressive system atop much older ones. The Portuguese did not discover the Indian Ocean trade. They violently inserted themselves into a pre-existing web that had been humming for, a web built by Arab, Indian, Chinese, and Southeast Asian sailors. Recognizing this does not diminish the scale of later European voyages, but it properly contextualizes them as part of a much longer human story of exploration and exchange. The real discovery is that we have always been more connected than we dared to believe. Our ancestors were not passive prisoners of geography. They were active participants in a world that was, in its own way, profoundly globalized. They traded goods, yes, but more importantly, they traded the components of civilization itself: seeds and saplings, metallurgical secrets, navigational stars, artistic motifs, and foundational myths. This recurring interaction was sporadic and often indirect, but its impacts were cumulative and transformative. A single successful crossing could alter the biological and cultural destiny of a continent. So what does this mean for our world today? It means the roots of our interconnected present run far deeper than we knew. The spices in your kitchen, the crops in our fields, even the stories we tell, are often the legacy of these ancient, forgotten voyages. It invites a humbler, more nuanced view of history, one where innovation is rarely born in a vacuum, but is instead passed along, adapted, and improved upon across cultures and across seas. The next time you look at a map, do not see the empty blue spaces as barriers. See them as the ancient highways they truly were, the forgotten roads that quietly, persistently, wove humanity into a single, intricate, and astonishingly old tapestry. The languages we speak today are living maps of ancient voyages. Stretching from the island of Madagascar off the coast of Africa all the way to the remote shores of Easter Island is a single, sprawling language family, Austronesian. This is not a coincidence of similar sounds. It is the direct, linguistic echo of the incredible migrations we have traced. The basic words for fundamental concepts, for numbers, for family members, for parts of a canoe share clear, traceable roots across this vast expanse. When a person in the Philippines says the word for 5, Lima, and a person in Hawaii says Lima, and a person in Madagascar says, they are speaking variations of a word carried in the canoes of their shared ancestors thousands of years ago. This linguistic thread, spanning more than half the Earth's circumference, is perhaps the most audible legacy of those ancient networks, a whispered conversation that never truly ended. Our dinner tables tell the same story of connection. The humble coconut, the starchy banana, the versatile taro root, these are not native to most of the lands where they now flourish. They were deliberate travelers, part of the transported landscape carried by Austronesian voyagers. Today, the coconut is a global symbol of the tropics, but its genetic trail follows human migration routes from Southeast Asia across the Indian Ocean to Africa and all the way across the Pacific. The banana, originally from the jungles of New Guinea, became a staple from Africa to the Americas because people recognized its value and took it with them. These foods transformed ecosystems and defined cultures, creating a shared culinary heritage across oceans. When you enjoy a dish made with coconut milk or a serving of taro, you are tasting the literal fruits of those ancient, daring journeys. The most intimate archive, however, is written within us. Modern genetic science allows us to read the biological signatures of those long-ago movements in the DNA of living populations. The people of Madagascar carry the clearest signal, with roughly half of their ancestry tracing directly back to Borneo in Indonesia, a stunning confirmation of a direct transoceanic migration. Across the Pacific Islands, genetic studies reveal a clear lineage descending from that original expansion, a family tree whose branches are separated by thousands of miles of open water. Even the subtle, debated genetic hints of Polynesian contact in some South American populations speak to the potential for individual voyages that left a faint but lasting biological mark. We are, in a very real sense, walking monuments to these forgotten networks. Our languages preserve the ancient words for journey and home. Our meals are built on crops that crossed oceans in canoe hulls. Our very bodies carry the blended history of encounters that happened long before written records began. This realization is not just an academic footnote, it is a profound shift in perspective. It tells us that isolation is the illusion, and connection is the ancient, enduring truth. The quiet networks did not vanish. They left a loud and lasting imprint on the human story, weaving a shared heritage that connects us all, reminding us that every culture is, in part, a product of gifts received from across the sea. The map on your wall is a lie of omission. For generations, it showed us a world of isolated cultures, brilliant but separate experiments in civilization, waiting to be connected by later explorers. But as we have sailed across these stories, from the pottery trail to the Roman coins in Vietnam, from the sweet potatoes voyage to the silent language of shared myths, a different truth emerges. These were not isolated worlds. They were nodes in a vast, humming network, a pre-modern internet of sea lanes and desert tracks where spices, stones, seeds, and stories were the data packets. The real discovery is not that these connections existed, but that they were the norm, the quiet, persistent background hum of human history. Our ancestors were not prisoners of their geography. They were its cartographers, reading the stars and the winds as a roadmap to one another. This changes everything. It means globalization is not a 500-year-old phenomenon born in the age of sail, but a 5,000-year-old process, characterized by pulses of intense connection, forgetting, and rediscovery. The drive to reach beyond the horizon, to trade, to share, and to learn from the distant other is woven into the very fabric of our species. Look at the world now, at the incredible web that connects us all in an instant. That is not an aberration. It is the latest, fastest chapter in a very old story. The ancient mariners did not have satellites or engines, but they had courage, profound observation, and an unshakable belief that the ocean was a road. Their legacy is not just in the artifacts we dig up, but in the interconnected world we inhabit today, a world they helped dream into being by daring to sail into the blue unknown. If this journey through the hidden highways of history has reshaped your view of the past, consider joining our community of curious minds. Subscribe to keep exploring the mysteries that rewrite our story, and let us know in the comments which piece of evidence, the chicken bones, the shared myths, or the linguistic threads, most profoundly changed your sense of our ancient world. Thank you for sailing with us.